Morning and welcome to the program. We're here till midday. Our number, if you'd like to join us, is 0800 80 1080. The email is Leighton at newstalkzb.co.nz. And if you want to, you can text on 9292. Big story today, of course, is, as it was yesterday, is the drop in the US share market and the following drops in different places around the world. And as everyone's been saying, and if you've been listening this morning, if you've been listening, I suppose, last night, it's been repetitive, yes. Everyone's got an opinion, because everyone's got to have an opinion, because people get paid to have opinions. I've got one blanket statement to make about it, and I'll make it in a second. It covers it pretty well. But there is expected to be analysts, if I quote, analysts are expecting our market to fall 2 to 3 points today in the wake of the carnage in the US and Asian markets. The Dow Jones dived to 4.6 yesterday in the second day of intense sell-off. The Australian market plunged 3.4. Paul Harrison of Salt Funds Management. Have you noticed how many fund management organisations there are now, and commentators from various this and various that, all with different names, doesn't think it's time to panic just yet. He says it feels different, and that's about all anybody's got really, is a feeling. It feels different to what we had during the GFC, where the likes of the investment bank Lehman Brothers fell over. Well, who's to say that something won't fall over here anytime soon? It's quite possible, but time will tell. Blanket statement is this. Nobody knows why it happened. They don't. They can speculate, they can have opinions, they can have feelings, but nobody knows why it happened. It just did. And so, on that basis, it's really hard to know why or how today will unfold. And New Zealand has to react. I mean, it's not going to rocket up, is it? It's not going to go up at all. At least at the beginning. Only time will tell. So we're a little after 10 o'clock, sometime when it's appropriate, we'll make a report. We'll talk to somebody who is at the coalface, presumably. But it'll be interesting, and a lot of people will be watching it. Even if you've got no shares, like me. No shares, none. Nothing. Nada, zilch. It's interesting. Apart from anything else, folks, it's interesting because it's all part of the great thing called human nature and behavioural patterns. And I love watching people and their reactions and behaviours and see how things unfold. Now, I was introduced, not literally but figuratively, to a commentator a few years ago. Her name is Nomi, spelt N-O-M-I, Nomi Prins, P-R-I-N-S. Now, I'm looking at an article from Zero Hedge, actually, although it didn't originate there. Nomi Prins fingers Trump's financial arsonists. Quote, next financial crisis, not if, but when, is true. Because there will be one. And everybody knows it. Big question now is this the one or not? She says, amid a roaring stock market, this is written before yesterday or this week, it was written on the 2nd, amid a roaring stock market and a planet of upbeat CEOs, few are even thinking about the havoc that a multi-trillion-dollar financial system gone rogue could inflict upon global stability. But watch out. Even in the seemingly best of times, neglecting Wall Street is a dangerous idea. With a ragtag Trumpian crew of ex-bankers and Goldman Sachs alumni as the only watchdogs in town, it's time to focus, because one thing is clear. Donald Trump's economic team is in the process of making the financial system combustible again. Collectively, the biggest US banks already have their get-out-of-jail-free cards and are now sitting on record profits after, not so long ago, triggering sweeping unemployment, wrecking countless lives and elevating global instability. So I leave that there. There's a bit more I want to deliver in a moment, entitled The Emperor Has No Rules. In contrast to all of the above, there is a major story across the Tasman today about the banks paying mum and dad investors billions of dollars in returns. The 4 Australian banks paid, I forgot what the figure was, but it was multi-billion, somewhere around the $4 billion mark in dividends. because of their success. It is not all a one-way street, which some people sometimes forget. People like you and me are quite able and capable of investing in the banks. And if so, we would have been part of this rather large delivery that they shoveled out. Some people like to whinge about the banks being evil and bastards and all sorts of things. Bottom line is that you can hold bank shares as easily as anybody else. Simply a matter of investing in them. So I haven't got any. Most of you won't have any, but some of you will. If you have, by the way, I'd be very intrigued to know what your reaction was to the dividend payout. I'd be very interested to know. The emperor has no rules, writes Naomi Prinz. Nearly every regulatory institution in Trumpville, tasked with monitoring the financial system, is now run by someone who once profited from bending or breaking its rules. Historically, severe financial crises tend to erupt after periods of lax oversight and loose banking regulations. By filling America's key institutions with representatives of just such negligence, Trump has effectively hired a team of financial arsonists. Naturally, Wall Street views Trump's chosen ones with glee. Amid the present financial euphoria of the stock market, big bank stocks prices have soared. But one thing is certain. When the next crisis comes, it will leave the last meltdown in the shade because our financial system is, at its core, unreformed and without adult supervision. Banks are not only remain too big to fail, but are still growing while this government pushes policies guaranteed to put us all at risk again. The only thing I'd say with regard to that is that she seems to be lumping it all on Trump. Wasn't any different under the previous administration of 8 years. Not at all. So I think that this is a reaction on her part. I think she's very good, by the way. I think it's a reaction on her part, though, to the screaming stock market that we've witnessed since Trump came into power. Now, if I can deal with that for a minute, because there's an interesting angle to it. Trump has claimed responsibility for it. He's claimed reward for it. And in part, he's right. Anyone who says he's not right is partly wrong, and anybody who says he's totally right is partly wrong. Trump has claimed responsibility for it because he is partly responsible for it. There is a reason that the American share market took off the way that it did after he became president. The answer is because there was a change of the guard. There was a feeling of euphoria in some circles, in many circles actually, not just in banking circles or in investment circles. There was a feeling of the brakes being, there was a feeling of the changing of the guard. And his positiveness is really what I'm aiming at. His positiveness is what partly inspired it. So the Democrats worked overtime to say that Trump had nothing to do with it. Trump can't control the share market. He can't control the economy. It's not up to him. He's BSing you because he's got nothing to do with it. Here's the irony. Now the Democrats are saying, as much as they can, it's Trump's failure that this happened. It's all about Trump now. The politics of the US have become so complicated that it really is, unless you are, and I said this, unless you are studying it as almost as a lifetime cause, at the moment, it's extremely hard to get on top of because there is one point made and then there's a counterpoint. And these counterpoints and counterpoints are getting really almost out of hand. But it is, for those interested, and I know there's plenty of you who are, it is interesting. 13 to 9, numbers 0800 80 1080, email Leighton at newstalkzb.co.nz. In other matters, the beehives that are being stolen for the honey. It's fascinating, don't you think? These have got to be professionals. Because you don't just get your ordinary Joe going in, the type who go in and knock off a couple of cows. Don't go in and nick beehives because you'd soon discover who they were on the basis that they'd be in hospital. The memo, the famous memo and now the counter memo, we'll deal with that a little later. Violence, burglaries in state housing and other things as well. This was sent to me with a comment by one of you. I think it was Peter. And it's a very telling story. And there's other matters too. Social media in schools, and my favourite story of the day. You ready? My favourite story of the day is dating co-workers. And is it a thing of the past? News talks to be. It's 9 to 9. Funny how, writes Jason, funny how the left-leaning media never mentioned the record highs the Dow Jones was doing every day under Trump. But it drops once and they're all over it. I don't think, Jason, that you're quite right that they never mentioned it, but they certainly didn't play it up. They couldn't not mention it, certainly in the business pages. But like you said, there's no screaming headlines like there are now. James, good morning.
Good morning, Leighton. I think that the anti-Trump campaign is so severe and so intense from the Democrats because they've done things they shouldn't have done, mainly illegal stuff. And if it finally comes to a head, it'll be like a house of cards that will just collapse.
What will collapse?
Primarily, there'll be lots of people within the Democratic Party and also people in the FBI and the other, where Rosenstein is also involved.
But what do you think is going to actually collapse as such?
Well, I think that they fought so hard to get Hillary Clinton in, and they did numerous illegal things, and it's stunning to see that the things that these people have done, they're still getting away with it because nothing really happens. Nothing has really happened, and I'm just wondering how far this is going to go before these people are going to finally be either arrested, fired, or whatever, because it's stunning what they've done to try and keep Trump out of office and also trying to get him out of office now.
All of the above. I've got a response for you, but I've got to take a break, so I'll deliver it afterwards. Appreciate the call. Okay. Thank you, James. News Talks to be, it's 7 to 9. News Talks to be, it's 4.5 to 9. So my previous caller pondered what would happen down the track. The answer is I wouldn't get too excited about too many arrests and charges and what have you. I just wouldn't. What's interesting is, and frustrating, is that there is so much obfuscation that goes on that things can get kicked, to borrow the almost tedious saying, the can keep getting kicked down the road. Just can. If there were, let's just take it one step further and say that sometime over the next year or so, there were arrests made. James Comey, well, not too many people would care. Seriously. Who else, what might we throw in there? How about Hillary Clinton? Because she was at the pinnacle of the power pyramid, that is accused of doing all sorts of things, including providing false information, etc., lying, and not even to forget the email server. Let's say that she was arrested and charged. There would be riots in the street. It could lead, and I don't think this is an overdramatic comment to make, it could lead to a civil war. There has been plenty of commentary over the last couple of years about things causing a second civil war in America. It's unlikely, but something like that could just lead to it, because if there were riots in the streets over that, they would be violent. Just think about it. Hillary Clinton, the goddess of progressivism, is arrested and charged. not even convicted yet, or otherwise. But she's arrested and charged, and there are riots. And they would ratchet up, and then there would be repercussions. And there would be pushback from the other side. And I'm not even talking law and order here, I'm talking from the other side. And there would be massive breakouts, I think, across most of the country. But I don't think we're ever going to find out whether I'm right or wrong. Email is Leighton at newstalksabe.co.nz, and you can text on 9292. I don't know about you, but I would imagine there's plenty like me who keep thinking today's Monday. Just maybe it was because I wasn't here Monday. But after a holiday in the middle of the week, well, after an extra long weekend, I suppose. Now, today could be, if I chose it to be, and I'm not, but it could be a book day. It could be solely books. There is one in particular that I'm looking at. The Art of Business by Greg Clydesdale. Now, we spoke with Greg Clydesdale at the end of last year about 2 or 3 books that he had written, and he proved to be very interesting. Greg Clydesdale is a lecturer at Lincoln University in New Zealand, obviously. And he then told us of a new book that he had coming out very shortly. And I now have a copy of it. It is entitled The Art of Business. But wait, there's more. How the Chinese Got Rich. China is on track to become the world's largest economy, yet the West still has a poor understanding of this economic giant. Clydesdale looks beyond the standard Western conception of Chinese business, the Silk Road, Marco Polo, and the opium trade, to examine how Cathayan merchants made money and how China's national commerce has evolved over time. In the book, he goes into historical practices, values, and achievements of Chinese business and examines how merchants built substantial wealth. It finishes today, of course. The final chapter is the evolution of the art, but it runs through the various dynasties, etc. And I haven't read it in its entirety, but I've had a damn good look at it, and it's a very interesting book. Published by published by Robertson. I thought it was Little Brown. Yes, littlebrown.co.uk. The Art of Business by Greg Clydesdale. It is, the others can wait for the moment. It's 9, coming up 10 after 9. News Talks AB. Jerry, good morning.
Good morning, Leighton. I'll tell you what, that segues right into what I was calling about.
Well, before you go on with your call, is there anything you can do to improve the phone? Because it's very sort of chamberish.
Oh, hang on. Any better?
That's much better, thank you.
All right. Did you hear what Xi Jinping called out Trump on last week? It's flown under the radar completely.
What, who called?
It's a massive call, and after Davos, and he said...
hang on. Who are you quoting? Who called Trump?
He didn't call, he called him out.
Who did?
Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier.
Okay.
Right? He said, after the tariffs and all these things that the trade war that Trump is threatening, Xi Jinping just turned around and said to the rest of the world at Davos, we were open for business.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to cost the US trillions.
I wouldn't bet on it.
Why?
Because when you get into verbal confrontations, people say things that suit their own purposes. And
it's not a verbal.
Yeah, sure it is.
It's a statement. It's not a verbal confrontation.
Of course it is, and I think it was a very clever retort. But
it's not a retort to anything. It's a statement.
No, it was a retort to Trump. And
a reply, not a retort.
Whatever you want. For me, it was a retort and a reply. Whatever you want. Doesn't matter. They're one and the same thing, in a sense. Now, you get somebody makes a comment, and somebody on the other team will push back. So you can call it a pushback as well, if you like. But it was a very clever one.
Mm.
So Settle for that. Now, you can say that all you want, but there are decisions that must be made based on much more than even just trade. There are political decisions. Trade and politics is tied up together. And if you're going to
trade trumps politics.
If you're going to tie yourself to China solidly and even completely, then you'll pay a price for it.
You do it. You don't have to, you know. So it's anyone's decision. You can trade with them, politics aside.
You can trade with anybody.
Mm.
And
right. That's exactly what China was saying to the rest of the world. You can trade with us anytime.
Yes. Okay.
What the American administration is doing at the time, right now, is saying, well, if you want to trade with us, this is what it's going to cost you.
Well, in certain areas, Trump is determined there isn't going to be a trade war. So, if you're going to have
I beg your pardon.
You heard me. He is determined that there isn't going to be a trade war. Now, to have a war, you've got to have two sides.
Yeah, well, he's starting it. If you're saying he doesn't want one, but he's starting it.
How's he started it?
Well, tariffs, number one.
On what?
One word.
On what?
Tariffs.
On what?
On Chinese products.
On washing machines and.
Yeah.
And what's the other thing?
Washing machines and TVs or whatever.
No, not a bit of any great significance. Now the question is, does it go any further? And if it does, if it does, then you don't know where it's going to end up. But if China is open for business, that would tend to mean that there's not going to be any response in the same manner against America. That's how I would interpret it. But watch this space. Call me back when there's another development. 9:15, News Talk CB. News Talk CB, it's 9:18. Jim.
Yeah, hello, Leighton. One of your callers before 9 o'clock in fact, you followed up with a reference to the left-leaning state of our media. Well, it actually seems to be a hell of a lot worse than we'd really appreciated, because on Friday, this was Saturday our time, but Friday in the US, the revelations of the Pfizer memo, that's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Committee, the release of their memo that actually documented a whole series of effectively criminal abuses by both the FBI's very, very senior people and implicates people in the Department of Justice. And here we have it all these days later. Not a single word has appeared in the New Zealand media, even on TV.
There must have been something.
There hasn't. I've looked. And the other incredible thing is, here has yesterday's small stock market correction, which is obviously for those, the commentators here looking at it objectively, it's a deal, but it's not a great big one. And it's headlines instantly. And yet here's this other deal in the States, and the way that it's going down and the way that the information is coming out, and all the revelations that are leading to even more serious revelations, which is really beginning to make Watergate, if it doesn't look like a Sunday school picnic, it's going to be pretty well in the same category. And yet, here in this country, our media deeming, oh, no, it's of no interest to the local populace at all.
Well, tell me something. I was going to ask you this anyway. Of all the people you know, and I presume you know a few, how many of them, what sort of interest is there in the sort of thing that you're talking about? I mean, can you get a bunch of friends round or go round to their place or meet up with them somehow and have a discussion and they're interested? Or Are you denied the audience that you, or the participation that you would enjoy?
It's a fair question. No, I'd have to say it's a small group amongst those that I know that would be interested. But the interesting thing, too, is the fact that if you travel and the subject comes up, and I'm just sort of saying in your own environs, it's an interesting perspective that you find other people who feel equally as strongly. And as I've said on your show countless times, I'm not really so interested in what sort of government we have as far as the politics are concerned. I just want good government. And to me, good government represents openness. And certainly we can't have a complicit media deciding what is information. I mean, look at the amount of absolute rubbish that was trotted out in support of Waitangi Day celebrations and the galloping legions of trivia that were floated before us in respect of every little touchy-feely thing you could imagine. And yet here's something that is going to have profound international implications, and goodness knows it may well result in the charging of Hillary Clinton. There's enough evidence to have her hanging at the present minute. I mean,
hold it there. There's a reasonably established reason why she won't be charged. You know what it is?
No.
Because if she is charged, it'll go all the way to Obama. And Obama will be protected until the ends of the earth.
Well, that's possible, but the thing is, sometimes whatever has to be, has to be. I mean, the biggest thing about the Clinton family by themselves, leaving Obama out of this, and definitely there is involvement that points to him, considerable involvement. But the Clinton family, both Bill and Hillary, were public servants virtually all their lives, apart from a short time while they were lawyers in the practice. How on earth have they accumulated as many millions, billions probably, as they have? And the New Zealand government just recently gave $13 million to the Clinton Foundation.
Well, I don't know. In fact, I need to follow up on that because we were paying it in installments, and the big question was, after the election, are they still going to pay it? And I suppose taking politics into account, the answer would be yes.
But what the question must be, what on earth would be the justification for New Zealand's government paying money to the Clinton Foundation? As Judge Janine Pirro asked the other day, not a single hospital wing or charitable donation of any substance has been seen anywhere with the Clinton Foundation's name on it.
Yeah. Look, the answer is we were conned. We had some fool, and I mean fool, in our team decided to pay it. And I don't care who it was. The person was a fool. It doesn't matter. I don't care who it is. Not stupid, just a fool. And we have been shortchanged, I think, on information on that front. I suspect I know who it was, and it doesn't surprise me. But nevertheless, Jim, appreciate the call. Thank you. 9:24, News Talk ZB. It is 27 after 9, News Talk ZB. Just from out of left field. I read this letter in the paper this morning, and I've got it refers to a letter in yesterday's paper. Let me just see if I can lay my eyes on it very quickly. It may not have been in the response. May not have. Sorry, the cause for the response may not have been in yesterday's paper. No, it doesn't look like it was. But it doesn't matter because the letter itself is self-explanatory. It's an example of something. See if you can grasp it. Well, I know you will. Heather Marion Smith, in her letter, is incorrect in almost everything she asserts. I was never a member of the McCaw Commission on Taxation, and though I chaired the 3-person committee which designed our GST in 1985, far from recommending that financial transactions be exempt from GST, as she claims, I recommended they be included. It was the Treasury that pointed out no other country in the world had been able to apply a GST to financial transactions, so they were eventually excluded in New Zealand also. But then she asserts that if a tiny tax of less than 0.5% in the dollar were imposed on all capital market transactions, the complicated GST could be scrapped. In that, she is simply wrong. The value of capital market transactions taking place daily is indeed vast, but they take place in response to minuscule differences in price between different financial instruments. A transaction tax of even 0.1% would kill almost all such transactions or simply move them overseas. The tax revenue gained would be trivial and would certainly not replace the revenue of GST. No country in the world raises significant revenue from such a tax. Now, it starts out with a batting away of an accusation, simply not true, claimed in a letter, and then dismisses quite satisfactorily the following claims by the author of the original letter. That reply I just quoted was Don Brash, by the way. To me, what it was an example of fake claims, ignorant claims, wrong claims, call them whatever you like, and how they can grasp reality for some people, unfortunately. It is 27 to 10. By the way, the story about Barnaby Joyce, and I heard it this morning. The funny part is, I had a quick look at the Australian papers this morning, quicker than usual, but I didn't pick up anything on it at all. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not. I haven't had a chance to go back. But hearing that story earlier this morning, Barnaby Joyce and his advisor's pregnancy and what have you, and everything else that went with the story, let's presume for the moment you're familiar with it, leads right into the discussion about workplace dating, workplace romances, workplace affairs that I wish to raise very shortly. It is 26 to 10. News Talks to me. Dennis, morning.
Oh, g'day, Leighton. I just wanted to follow up on what that chap was saying about media and the American system and whatever. And it seemed, I've been listening this morning, and you talked about the stock market business. I think that in the great scheme of things, there will be stock market crashes from time to time. There'll be,
of course there
sometimes they'll just go down. The thing that I consider to be very dangerous that's going on at the moment is the ridiculous division between the sides in the United States of America and the role that the extremely dishonest television media are playing in that. And I've got to say that dishonesty absolutely extends to our television media here. Television One, I used to watch it. I've given up in the last week because I just can't hack it anymore. TV, the TVNZ News.
Why can't you?
Well, you got to judge them by what they do, and they've got a new blanket of political correctness over them now, which is sort of sickening, really. I've got to say, but. The other thing they've been doing is reporting on Donald Trump, and what's going on with Donald Trump in the United States and the United States politics is a world-moving, has world-shaking possibilities. And all they want to do is talk about the gossip. And when you see those two people who present the news reading some story that denigrates Trump and is actually trivia, and they can't wipe the smiles off their faces. These people are there to report the news, not to do body language or make commentary on it, in my view. And the stories that they select about Donald Trump are pathetic in the extreme. When TVNZ News says there's been a car crash, I believe them. When they say the plane's crashed somewhere, I believe them. If they say there's been a storm, I believe them. Everything else has got to be taken with a grain of salt because they should not be making political commentary. They should report the news in the way they used to report it in the old days when people like Philip Sherry were doing it.
The news delivery has changed and changed. The news media has changed a lot since Philip stopped working. Not because he stopped work, not because he retired, but I'm just saying you mentioned him. So since then, the delivery has changed considerably, and not necessarily for the better, granted.
But that's because we've decided that it's acceptable for them to offer us bias in every news broadcast.
Well, no, that's not entirely true. You haven't decided it's acceptable, so you've stopped watching.
And I have, and I've tried to watch the other one, TV3, and it's a little weird. But I mean, I see it. It's the news coming out of the United States is dramatically biased, and we've got to be concerned about a nation that has been running this narrative about the Russian thing for the last year or more, 18 months, with not a smidgen of proof anywhere, and also running the same narrative about Hillary Clinton and her emails and all the rest of their corruption, and absolutely nothing's been done about it. And we do, and I absolutely agree with you, that if Hillary Clinton gets arrested, they could have big trouble over there, and that's because that could polarise the situation they've got now. But the situation they've got now in the United States, I would consider very volatile, and I think that probably the most stable country on the planet right now, stable superpower, is actually China.
Well, if you're going to say China is the most stable, what reason would you give it for being so?
Well, they're sort of insular. They don't leap around the place. They're not divided amongst themselves. They're obviously a potential threat and that kind of thing, but they are quite stable. They don't show any signs of falling apart, whereas the United States does. And if the United States falls apart or gets divided or whatever, we've got this massive military arsenal that could fall into the hands of any kind of lunatic. But it concerns me that it seems to me that what's going on in the United States is that there's a bunch of people who want to preserve the culture, and there's a bunch of the American culture, and there's a bunch of people who want to destroy it. And that seems to me to be the motivating factor, because otherwise, why would they be going on the path that they're going down?
All right, let me summarise it. You're correct. There is one team that wants to destroy it, undermine it, change it, and they're riding on the back of Obama's great change predictions and promises. That's one. The other team wants to retain the basis of the structure of the country, and they've got a problem. The problem is they're not keen enough to do it, except for a small handful. The others simply aren't keen enough to do it. They're not. They haven't got the guts.
I think that's probably true too, and but they don't have the sort of they don't have the organisation set up to set about doing it, whereas the other side does. And so I think that we're moving into a dangerous period at the moment. It's pretty obvious. People feel it. They talk about it all the time, and. I don't know where it's going to go from here, but I think that
where it's going from here is providing us with a great deal of interest, discussion, if we want it, and watch this space ness. Watch this space ness. Dennis, thanks for the call. 20 to 10. It is 15 to 10. Now, the story from across the Tasman with regard to Barnaby Joyce, Deputy Prime Minister. And the great debate seems to be whether or not politicians' personal lives are fit for targeting by the media, first of all, and as a result of that, of course, by the general public. What do you say? And the answer is, of course they are. Of course they are. With exceptions. But in the main, of course they are. I could sit here and justify that forever. Some of you will agree and some of you will disagree. For those who don't know, this is briefly the story. Barnaby Joyce and his wife have split up. What's he got? 3 daughters with her. He had an affair with what turns out to be his media advisor, who is, from memory, 33. He's a little bit older. And this was kept from the... She's I think, heavily pregnant now, due to give birth in the not too distant. And it's the story's broken. It was not, and I don't know the detail of this. I'm repeating what I heard this morning on breakfast. That it was a not very well kept secret in the within the media. That's what I understand. They have moved in together ahead of the birth of the child that's due in April. A friend of the Deputy Prime Minister said the pregnancy was shrouded in secrecy because he was concerned about the well-being of his daughters. He has been struggling with the family breakup, but it's put an enormous pressure on him. He's had some pretty dark times. Really? And yet this was prior to the whole debacle that led to his re-election. Running the campaign and what have you. I find it extraordinary. So here's a question. Seeing that the media was aware of this, in your opinion, should it have been exposed prior to the by-election? I mean, Barnaby Joyce had to resign because of dual citizenship, had to resign from Parliament, stood at the by-election and got overwhelmingly re-elected. In your opinion, do you think that should have been exposed before the by-election? In the lead-up to the by-election? Who knows what effect it would have had? It would have had some effect, unquestionably, in my mind. Some effect. Would it have prevented him from being re-elected? I have no idea. I think he's pretty damn popular in his electorate. So I don't know. But the question is the electorate's right to know. The public's right to know. So again I say, in your opinion, would that have been did the media fail? Might be another way of putting it. Did the media fail in its responsibility? And then off the back of that, we'll get into workplace relationships. Valentine's Day. Where are we? It's the 7th, so it's a week away from today. Valentine's Day, next Wednesday. No, this is not an ad. It's just a commentary. There's one very clever. By the way, what happens to the price of flowers in this country on Valentine's Day? I refuse to pay it. They just go nuts. Why is it? Because it's supply and demand. Anybody who last year, for instance, bought flowers on Valentine's Day, what did you pay? I mean, let's say you got a dozen roses. What did you pay for them? Whatever it was a fortune. In the it's markets and everything else, but in the States, you can buy a dozen red roses, long-stemmed red roses, and have them delivered, delivery included, for $20, $19.95 or whatever it is, $20. And if you want to double it, it costs you $10 more. So for $30, you get 2 dozen. I would say that for a dozen here, you'll be paying $60. Just a guess. Just a guess. Anyway, the reason for mentioning it is that there's a wine crowd that's got rather clever. And their line is, because you can't drink flowers. Just thought I'd throw it in. I think it's a very, very clever little line. Now, let me go back to Barnaby Joyce. And whether or not, and re-ask the question, because nobody responded yet, so I'm going to milk it. Ask the question whether or not the Australian media failed, and don't forget he's basically, he was a Kiwi until he denounced it or renounced it. But the Australian media's failure to report on the fact that he and his wife had split up, that he was had been having an affair for a lengthy period of time, I gather, with an office worker, an advisor, and that they're a team in more ways than one. And there's a baby on the way. That brings us back to: can you still date a co-worker? Well, actually, it depends. You might need to disclose it, or maybe even sign a love contract. So really, it's complicated. US companies are trying to keep romantic relationships from spiraling into a risk factor. The national conversation on sexual harassment and the abuse of power has galvanised a wider discussion about whether consensual office relationships are in fact okay. I struggle with this for more than one reason. I struggle with it because we are so far down the track of a changed living, working, relationship environment that I find it extraordinary that this is even a matter. In early January, 4 women at Asana, ASANA, 3 from Human Resources and 1 from Marketing, gathered around an oversized conference table to tackle the San Francisco-based software's startup's first ever dating policy. As they looked up at a large screen projection of the document, the women laboured, I wonder if that was intentional, the women laboured over how to define a workplace romance, tweaking it and deleting phrases that described it as a mutual attraction between 2 employees. The group also grappled with the question of when employees who are not each other's managers should disclose a relationship. When employees who are not each other's managers should disclose a relationship. What about a one-night sexual encounter? No, that felt too intrusive. What if they'd gone on several dates, but it was still not a committed relationship? Anna Binder, Asana's head of people operations, suggested that employees might casually inform someone in Human Resources but not formally record it. I want to be reasonable, Ms. Binder said during the meeting. I just don't want to be policing every kiss. I'm pondering that. What if it's a forced kiss? What if it's an unwilling kiss on one party's side? Anyway, over the last decade, the share of workers who say that they have ever dated a colleague has hovered around 40%, according to an annual survey. In its survey conducted, this is by Career Builder, in its survey conducted at the end of last year, the share dropped to 36%, a 10-year low from 41%, a 10-year high in 2016. So, in 2016 it reached a 10-year high, and then the following year immediately dropped to a 10-year low, albeit that it's only a percentage difference of 5 points. Many companies have long had policies discouraging relationships between managers and direct reports. Human resources experts say. But some employers are starting to review their rules and are now drawing a hard line in the sand. According to a fellow called Doug Smith, managing principal of law firm Jackson Lewis in Pittsburgh, Mr. Smith said he had a dramatic increase in employer clients calling about sexual harassment policies since September. He's recommending that they put strict rules in place, barring managers from dating anyone further down the organisation, with firing as a potential consequence. He said every company he makes the recommendation to is following suit. They're moving very quickly to get it on their books. What we've got is something that's really, truly out of hand. What we've got, starting with Weinstein, or Weinstein, whichever you want, is a rolling ball, a rolling rock now, that really is starting to dominate far too many lives. Big question. Why is it so?
Hi, it's Kate Hall.
0800 80 1080. Email Leighton at newstalksabe.co.nz. You can text on, 9292. 10:30ish, we'll talk with, I've forgotten who it is now, but we're going to talk with somebody from on the market. I just noticed, by the way, in the news we had reported that a rebound in the US markets late in the day could see a softer blow to the NZX as it opens. That increase in the Dow Jones, that increase was the biggest one-day rise since 2015. So all the stuff that's gone before, another session of high drama on Wall Street with the Dow Jones closing up 567 points or 2.3%, details CH602, whatever that means. Bottom line is that it's being reported it's the biggest one-day rise since 2015, which means it's pretty dramatic. Mark Lister from Craig's is who we'll be talking to at 10:30-ish. In the meantime, back to workplace relationships. Can you still date a co-worker? There's a reason that things have got to this particular point. And there's a great deal of fuzziness involved in this, and this is why they're struggling to try and work it out. As that woman said, I want to be reasonable. This is the what do you call them? You know, not human rights, human relations woman, HR. I want to be reasonable. I just don't want to be policing every kiss. But there's a reason. There's a reason why we've got to the point where there is now so much interference with our lives and so much regulation. It's quite simple. Asana says, by the way, this has got nothing to do with it. Asana, that's the startup company, says the need for its policy has more to do with its growing size than angst over the recent raft of sexual harassment allegations in the US. The 10-year-old startup has grown to just over 300 workers, among whom there are currently 5 known romantic relationships. They're going to be grey areas when you put human beings in a building together. Clarity helps people navigate to make good decisions. Clarity. Well, there is no end to the clarity that will be required when it comes to something like this. And it involves other people sticking their oar into situations that really, once upon a time, they had no place in. The reason, in my humble opinion, is very simple. We've forgotten the rules of society. We've dissed them. We've dumped them. There has been such an aggravated and motivated need to change society's rules. Women can do anything. Women can do anything men can do, including getting tanked and having one-night stands and all sorts of, fun and games. But once upon a time, there were some societal rules. Of course, they weren't perfect. Of course, they were broken, probably on reasonably regular occasions. But they were rules, nevertheless, that the majority of people abided by. Majority. Now there aren't any. And because there aren't any, we've now got a rise in, shall we say, interrelationship crime in the workplace. And so we have to now introduce a whole new set of interfering busybodies into everybody's life, because we seem to be incapable of conducting ourselves with some sort of propriety. It was foreseeable in the first place. Secondly, we accept the interference. Why? I don't know. Because we're stupid. We accept the interference because we're told it's necessary. We accept the interference because we are becoming more and more inclined to accept interference in our lives. Are we not? Over and over and over again, there is an increase. You look at the number of people who are employed now in HR. Largely because people don't have any societal rules to behave by. So therefore it's got to be top down instead of self-administering. Because people don't know how to administer their own lives properly. It's appalling. In my humble opinion. Trish, morning.
Good morning, Leighton. Now, you asked 2 questions before the news. One was about the media reporting about Joyce.
Yep.
The reason, in my opinion, the media only reports what it's allowed to report these days. So that's my opinion on that.
Hang on. What do you mean allowed to report?
Well...
What's the defining regulation then?
Well, I would think it would be, what is good for us to know, in their opinion, That's it's just my opinion, Leighton.
No, I know that, but I'm interested to know what, the reasoning behind the opinion. So what's the second point?
Well, the second point is about Joyce himself. You asked that question. I think it should have been made known. And the reason that I think that is because I believe that people who have these affairs are liars. They're lying to their families, and they may even be lying to the person they're having an affair with, which makes them a liar. I'm sure that his wife and children, daughters, would agree with that. And I think it's really unfortunate that people who have affairs with married people think that the same thing's not going to happen to them. How can you trust a liar? We need to know when people are telling lies. Of course, a lot of people don't actually mind about
hang on. At which point?
Because they have affairs themselves.
Okay. At which point does the lying start? Which lying are you talking about? You're talking about what we might call a dishonesty in the behaviour, or are you talking about the lies that are then told as a result of what they've started?
Well, in my opinion, both of those things are lying. Dishonesty is a lie. What else would it be?
Well, if you go back in history, as far as you like, even to biblical times, you'll find that human nature is a very all-empowering, overpowering factor in matters of life. And sometimes things happen without you meaning them to happen. Sometimes they happen. I'm not making excuses. I'm just relating it as it is. Sometimes things just happen without you realizing it was going to happen, or without the intention of it happening, and then they get out of control.
Well, I think if we're talking about people having affairs, that just doesn't happen by accident. That is a lack of self-control, and it's bad choices.
I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with you, because I think there's arguments on both sides. It's, I think, for instance, that if in the conversation we were to move past the fact that things just fall into place sometimes for some people, but then as a result of that, untruths get told because they have to be, and those untruths really are lies, but the lying gets ever more dominant in the whole affair. It's probably a lack of ability of people to discipline themselves into, once you start something like that, actually putting things right according to the circumstances. And that could have multiple interpretations, I suppose.
Yeah, well, as I said, that's a lack of self-control, in my opinion. And I don't think that we should make excuses for people accidentally having affairs and accidentally being honest. It's just call it what it is.
You know, I remember, just as a matter of interest, you've reminded me of a conversation that we had on this program once many, many, many years ago. And there's many years to be had, where I was having a discussion, or we were having a discussion about whether the utilisation of prostitutes was acceptable and or understandable. Maybe put it the other way, understandable and or acceptable if one was married to a partner who was physically unable to indulge in sexual matters for reasons of illness, and as opposed to leaving that person and or getting involved in another relationship, the visiting of prostitutes was supposedly an emotionless factor that helped resolve that situation. You just reminded me of that. What's your take on that?
Well, I suppose if they both agreed that he absolutely had to have sex...
Or it might be a she, for that matter.
Yes, exactly. If they both agreed, then I suppose that is a good way to go. But then it opens the door to so much more lying, doesn't it? And dangerous sex, where you might pass something on to your loved one, or actually you might just pass it around to the 3 prostitutes that you're seeing.
Well, that's another discussion altogether, I guess. Anyway, Trish, appreciate it. Thanks for the call.
Thanks, Leighton.
News Talk to me, 19 after 10. News Talk to me, it's 22 after 10. I've just got to recap something for Remuera Arise. The phone number is 0800 00 1585. 0800 00 1585. I crashed it. Where did that go? Now, not the company's business. The breakup, however, needs to be managed when it impacts on the workplace and productivity. Not the well, that makes it the company's business, because does it not? Because things can go wrong. Things can go dramatically wrong. I just have a very strong feeling that people manage their own lives without the help of HR people, etc., by utilising societal rules, and when they fell foul of those, or failed to adhere to them, or they let them down, or whatever, they manage themselves anyway. What it's led to is this continuing increase in bureaucracy and interference in people's lives, and rules and regulations. And as more and more rules and regulations are implemented, and I'm not just talking about in interpersonal relationships and company laws and what have you. Take another one that I feel very strongly about. Take another one, and that is the number of female company directors there might be, or CEOs, or whatever it might be, and the implementation of rules. It's got to be 50-50. There's a prime example of this that I'll give you in just a second, but it's going to keep increasing until one day there will be major pushback, or one day the whole thing will come crashing down because everyone will realise that it's a farce. That example, by the way, is Justin Trudeau. There's a couple of things on Justin Trudeau that we'll deal with a bit after 11:30. Make sure I remember, please. Andrew is subbing for Carolyn this morning, for Mrs. Producer. You would be Mr. Stand-in Producer, Mr. Sub. And a very fine one, too. 25 after 10. Ray, good morning.
Morning, Leighton. Hey, on the issue of Barnaby Joyce, I'm all about the freedom of press, but is this really news? Is this really what the press is determining should be reported on and is in the public's interest? Surely what's going on in Barnaby Joyce's life in relation to his ex-wife, his current children, and his new girlfriend, surely it's only his information and doesn't actually have any bearing or interest in his ability to do his current role.
That's why I asked the question, to see what you thought. Don't forget that this was going on during the by-election.
Yeah.
Now, did the electorate? It's really a question of whether politicians' private lives are acceptable fodder for for media.
And so I go back to I support the freedom of the press, but
go back to a situation that had some similarities, as a couple of people have pointed out to me this morning in emails, of the Mayor of Auckland, who ran a campaign, and we found out only after he'd won the mayoralty that he'd been involved with a rather salacious arrangement with a woman outside his marriage. Now, hang on. If there's no question that would have affected, if it had been divulged beforehand, that would have affected the vote. How much is open to conjecture, but it certainly would have had an effect. Now, did the voting public have the right to know what he was up to?
No, I think when you've got adults in consenting relationships with each other, that shouldn't be open public fodder for the media, and I don't think it's relevant information for the general public. I think, sure, you know, you're in the media, like, and you must understand that things have got to be for the public interest, and if you can't meet that criteria of something actually genuinely being
all right.
to the public,
I tell you what, Ray, if you want to hang on there, I'll come back to you after the break, but I'm running late. It is 27 to 11. Now, I asked Ray to stay on and then got involved in all sorts of conversations and things about other matters like the stock market, what have you. Ray, what was the last thing that we said?
Well, I think I was questioning the integrity of the press to be chasing the salacious information like this. And I think what unintended consequences for the press will be if they spend all their time reporting on stories which aren't that important, I think people will start to value what the press say less and less.
See, the question then becomes, and it always was, is this background story, if you like, or this personal story of relevance to the public, apart from just the gossip aspect of it? Now, hang on.
I don't believe it is, do you?
Hang on. Well, the answer is that depends on the individuals involved, because it's up to every voter, if you want, to decide whether or not it's important to them. Now, I'd suggest to you that there would be a percentage, could be a good percentage of voters who might say, that's very important to me because of my belief system and because I wouldn't vote for this man under these circumstances if I'd known about this in the first place.
Okay, but so you're talking about the integrity of the person in question, is that correct?
Yes, I guess. Or hang on. Let's say it's partly that, but let's say it's as much to do with the standards of the voter.
But does the integrity of a candidate, does that determine how well they can or can't do their job? And if it doesn't, is that information actually in the public's interest?
Well, who's going to make that decision about whether or not it counts for the voter?
Probably the press, I guess. And I said, I think.
No, I'm really talking about the individual voters themselves. Because in the Auckland case, there were a substantial number of people who had been led up the garden path, and who would not have voted for the candidate if they'd known at the time what was going on.
Quite possibly, but I just think unless the issue itself impacts on the person's ability to do whatever job they're meant to be doing, whether it be Barnaby Joyce or will it be a mayor of Auckland, I just think it isn't actually that relevant for the public to know. Because we're talking about salacious little tidbits, which are just gossip, really. It's just people who are... No.
It's not. If it's actually happening, if there's something fairly major, I'd call this in the fairly major category. It affects people's lives. It affects their attitude. It affects their ability to do their job in some cases because they're dramatically distracted. Anyway, I'll leave it at that because I need to, Ray. But thanks for the call. Good call. 24 to 11 News Talk CB. Now, head of private wealth research at Craig's Investment Partners, Mark Lister. Good morning.
Morning, Leighton.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. It's probably busy. Is it busy?
Lots of people are wondering what's going on, so we're getting lots of questions and inbound queries. But things have calmed down a little bit compared to the last few nights.
The market here was down 2% on opening. Where might it be now?
Yeah, it's still around that same level, not quite 2%, but I think that's probably a good performance given that while we were all on holiday yesterday, you saw some big falls in Australia, Japan, Europe, the US, sort of 3 to 5%. So a fall of 2%-ish is probably not too bad.
On the bottom side of expectations?
Certainly a more modest decline than expectations, and part of that is because we saw a big turnaround in the US markets just in the last few hours, so they actually finished up, and that's probably softened the blow a little bit. Well,
Dow Jones up 567 points, 2.3%, and I saw earlier on the ticker tape that was the biggest rise, one-day rise since 2015.
Yeah, it's the biggest rise in a while, and obviously we had the biggest fall in a few years a couple of nights ago. So still volatility is pretty strong, and you're seeing some massive swings, which is a little bit unnerving. We'll just have to see if this current stability or rebound holds, or whether we get another sort of bout of weakness over the rest of the week.
What would you say it was closest to, 87 or 08?
I don't think it's as close to either, to be honest. It's certainly not as dramatic as what we saw in 08. 87's a little bit before my time, but I suspect it was nowhere near close to that. It reminded me of, if you remember back in sort of 2015, 2016, where you had the Chinese share market tanking, and there was all of those issues around the Greek debt default with the IMF. It was a bit like that period, which of course we did come through and survived. So I think it's more comparable to one of those periods rather than one of the really big ones like 08 or 87.
Okay. So last question: if this continues to fluctuate as much as it has so far, would you imagine that we would follow suit, or would we? Are we in a position in New Zealand to stabilise before anybody else?
Look, I think what you need to remember is that this is very much something that's happening in Wall Street and in financial markets. Now, the real economy, both offshore and here, is still very strong, and we're not seeing any signs of recession at all anywhere. So that sort of gives me confidence that it will blow over. And look, I mean, markets are overdone. They've gone up too much, too fast, and I think it's just a natural sort of correction. So in many ways, I think it's healthy, and I think New Zealand probably will come through a little bit stronger than some of the other parts of the world.
Very good. Appreciate it. Thank you kindly.
All right, thank you.
Mark Lister from Craig's Investment Partners. News Talks at me, it's 20 to 11. News Talks at me, it's 15 to 11. Now, I said Justin Trudeau, I made reference to him earlier and said more on that later. Well, it's now later. There are 2 points, or 2 things about Trudeau. Now, my mate Bill the plumber is living in Canada now. I think he's probably going to become a citizen. Married a Canadian. I know he's got what do you call it? Residency that's been approved. He'll probably end up getting married. And good luck to him. But he sends me stuff. Well, not as much as he used to, but he sends me stuff, both praising Canada and where it's at and what have you, and stuff critical of New Zealand, or at least my New Zealand anyway. Let's put it that way. So there are 3 things about Trudeau. My understanding is, and I haven't verified it, but I saw the headline, that Trudeau has changed the wording in the national anthem. So it's gender neutral. National anthem's now gender neutral. The other point is, in his cabinet, and I'm doing this from memory, but I'm pretty sure my memory's accurate. In his cabinet, he has insisted on a 50-50 male-female split. Now, that in itself is sexist, but not gender neutral. Well, to get to the split, to organise it, you've got to get sexist, you see. That's my argument. Anyway, he's got a 50-50 split of cabinet ministers, or close enough to it. Now, that's on top of the fact, or beside the fact, that there are the new parliament his party is made up, the government is made up of 22% female. So by making the cabinet 50%, making it 50-50, he's playing outside the rules. The same rules that if you had a representation that matched the makeup of the caucus, then that would be one thing. But to load it when you know what I'm saying, to load it with a 50% loading when the makeup of the caucus is from a group that is only 22% of that caucus is really absurd. That means that patently the best people aren't in the job. It's just, What gets me is that kids are getting bombarded with this through the education system now, both at school and at university, and they come out thinking that this is the way that it should be. This is appropriate. It's not at all. The appropriateness is simply the best person for the job. And if you're going to load up something as important as a government with people from a minority that overshoots their representation just for the sake of political correctness, it's nuts. Anyway, Trudeau took a question about religious non-profits from a woman affiliated with the World Mission Society Church of God. Forget that it was her if you're not into it. Canadian regulations place restrictions on volunteering with religious organisations. The woman asked whether the government could loosen those regulations as she discussed her church's theology of God's maternal love. Now, this runs about 50 seconds. Listen.
The Queen's Award in the UK. We have received I have a question.
Question.
Yes, we have received many awards throughout the whole world. However, unfortunately in Canada, our volunteering as a charitable religious organization is extremely difficult. Extremely. That's why in actuality we cannot do free volunteering to help our neighbors in need as we truly desire. So that's why we came here today to ask you to also look into the policies that religious charitable organizations have in our legislation so that it can also be changed, because maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look into
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly. Yes, thank you.
We can all learn from each other.
There you go. So, I mean, can you believe it? She's asking a serious question on this particular matter, and he interrupts with something that trivial. Person kind. Mankind already was all-inclusive. Gee, the guy is a jerk of the first order. Oh, I forgot. Prime Minister of Canada and the Prime Minister of New Zealand are buddies. I shouldn't say things like that, because that's probably reflecting on our Prime Minister or reflective of our Prime Minister, and that would be the wrong thing to do, because you can't criticise our PM. We all know that now, don't we? Anyway, the point being that the whole crowd cheered. They're all young. Hang on, let me look at the crowd. I can see one guy who's a bit older. Two guys who are a bit older. No, that's three. How do you tell a guy that's a bit older in a crowd of young people? Well, if they're wearing ties, it's a dead giveaway. But there's only one guy who I can see is wearing a tie. The others are open necks. Anyway, that's the point being, it's people kind, not mankind, says Trudeau. And the whole crowd cheered. 8 to 11, News Talk Sydney. News Talk Sydney, 7 to 11. Now, after 11:30, where's my book? After 11:30, we will talk with... did you take it? No, there it is. I've got it. Don't worry. Thank you. We'll talk with Greg Clydesdale on the art of business, how the Chinese got rich. And I knew this book was coming out, and he sent it to me, came out at the end of last year, it was published. He sent it to me over the the Christmas vacation. But I didn't get it until last week. It's the contents, again, are extremely good. Greg Clydesdale is a lecturer in the Department of Business Management at Lincoln University in Christchurch, the author of 3 books, Entrepreneurial Opportunity, Human Nature, and Waves of Prosperity. And he's written numerous articles for all sorts of journals, like the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics and Entrepreneurship, Regional Development, Creativity Research Journal, etc. He deals with the different dynasties. In fact, they're listed in the front. You know, there were 1, 2, 3. 3 is divided into... my knowledge of Chinese history is poor. Very broad and very poor. So I'm going to learn something from this. But he's got 1, 2, 3, the third one, the Zhou dynasty, from 1045 to 256 BC. Looks like it's got 1, 2, 3 different sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Another one's got two different. Well, it's got a breakdown of 2 different periods. It's probably a better way to put it. But he covers the dynasties. He writes about the merchant culture. He writes about overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia, the evolution of the art of Chinese business, that is. For example, the secrets of Chinese success begin in childhood. Chinese children are taught to work hard, value education, and save rigorously. This can be seen in the merchant manuals, which stress the importance of teaching the value of money and hard work. To this day, the Chinese retain a reputation for hard work. The current generation of young Chinese may be less frugal than their ancestors, but the emphasis on hard work remains. I wonder for how long. Today, tiger mothers continue to force a strong work discipline on their children, with the consequence that Chinese students gain higher grades in their studies than other ethnic groups. Remind me that I've got to ask him about the IQ, and whether, because we touched on this last week in a manner that pertains to this, that suggested that it was the amount of work they put in rather than any IQ level that's higher than it might be elsewhere. And then in the end, we get to the notes. In the end, we learn, if you like. Well, leave it to him, because he will describe it. Now, I mentioned another couple of books this morning, one I haven't even opened yet. Amazon book arrived on Monday. Didn't get it till this morning. I know what's inside it, and it's one that we've all been waiting for, by Jordan Peterson, who has been everywhere since the book's released last week. He has been everywhere. If you listened to American radio, you would have heard him. If you watch American television, you would have heard him. I think it was either this morning or yesterday that he was on Fox Breakfast. I know that because it came up on a search that I was doing. I didn't see it, but it came up on a search. Anyway, Greg Clydesdale, after 11:30, on his new book, The Art of Business, How the Chinese Got Rich. It'll be worth hearing. Email is Leighton at newstalktome.co.nz, and you can text on 9292. I don't know where that's coming from. I'll close the microphone instead. Now, just following along, writes Sue, with an earlier caller you were speaking to after 9:30 this morning. As of 3 months ago, I stopped watching TV1 or TV3 News. I could not take it anymore. For my daily intake, I listen to the radio news, go online, watch other TV channels, as well as follow commentary from several other sources. Biggest example of why I don't watch TV1 and TV3 is that 6 months out from the 2016 US presidential election, my husband said that Donald Trump would win. This was the impetus for me to start watching other TV news sources aside from 1 and 3. After 18 months of tuning into other TV news channels, I find the bias and fake news reporting relating to anything Donald Trump on both those local channels to be appalling, delivered by presenters with smirky smiles and superior attitudes. And no, I do not want to listen to their opinions either, as I prefer to make up my own mind. Looking back, I guess, I must have lived under a rock, recognising that some news you take with a grain of salt, but also relying on the overall truth being reported. This is now no longer the case, and the onus is on all of us to do our due diligence and get informed. And that last line, I agree with completely. This is no longer the case, and the onus is on, this part of it in particular, the onus is on all of us to do our own due diligence and get informed. Now, the pushback from that, from some people, is I haven't got time to do that, and I understand it. It's true. So the only way round that really is to find where you can get this. Well, is it the information that you want to hear, or is it the information that you should hear? That's what the point is. But it's really a division, and it's happened this way. It's happened this way because of technological improvements in life. Everything that's happened over the last, 20, well, since, let's date it back to the internet. When did the internet actually come into play, really? When did the internet come into play? And you'd have to say it was more or less the middle to late 90s. And it's improved out of sight since then. When I say improved, I mean essentially the technology and the supply of information, availability anyway, has improved dramatically. And you can get you can get your own thoughts endorsed, whatever they might be. Whatever they might be, I reckon you can find endorsement for them somewhere on the internet. So most people search out somewhere that endorses their own thoughts. Most. If you're a thinking person, and this doesn't eliminate people from either side of the political aisle, but if you're a thinking person, you want to know what the other side is thinking. You want to know what their thoughts are, what they're basing their opinions on, and so you spend time in places at sources where you can get that. Sometimes it will influence you. Most of the time, probably not, but sometimes it will. I've experienced that. I've changed my mind on a few things, or at least had it modified in certain ways over a period of time because the other team has come up with the opposition team, if you want, has come up with something that regulates one's own thought processes. But there's something that gets thrown about quite erroneously. I was going to say from time to time, but on a regular basis. And that is accusations that, for instance, someone who is opinionated or is paid to have an opinion or both only asserts their, and I get this thrown at me, only asserts their opinion and doesn't delve into or expose the other team. Bottom line is that's the way it's worked. If we go back a little in New Zealand media history, there was a time when, it was way back now, a couple of decades, I suppose, when we would say, if you're going to have one opinion aired, then you need a counter opinion. Doesn't have to be back to back. It can be program to program even, or at different times of the day or the week. But there's you expose both sides of the argument. That has pretty well ceased as far as I'm concerned. Pretty well. Bias? No, not bias at all. It's simply that the mainstream media now pushes one line, one angle, pretty much all the time, and does not delve into or give what you might call balance, particularly when it comes to news reporting. On that particular basis, we know, this is my point, I know what the mainstream is. I know what the other side is because I'm exposed to it constantly. So I'm not interested in giving that airtime because it's already getting it. And I think that that's fair enough. I think that's a most sensible approach to it, just from my perspective. If you already know because of the exposure it's had, because it's pushing its barrow, be it climate change, be it anti-Trumpism, be it a total lack of understanding of what or how the American political system works, which pretty much the news media here is how they approach it, then there's no need to, because it's already exposed in the public news venues. So the onus is really on them on the mainstream, if they want to go down that particular road, the onus is on them to start doing it, because it's only come about this way because of the bias that's developed over a period of time. And the New Zealand media reflects, and I go back to Sue's email, the media in New Zealand reflects overseas news that suits their purposes and their approach to life rather than anything else. Now, you want to disagree with that? Feel free. 0800 80 1080 at 16 past 11. News talks to be 19 past 11. George, morning.
Good morning, Leighton. I'd just like to support that lady's email that you just read regarding the TV news. Either channel, I no longer watch either of them. They're just hopeless. I might give you an example, going back a bit now. I think it was the breakfast show. They invited people to email them, make comment on Trump. And the lady that was doing the commentary received this email supporting Trump, which she then proceeded to screw into a ball and throw at the camera. These are call themselves professional journalists.
Well, no. I have no idea who you're talking about, and I don't want to know.
Yeah, that's true.
Don't tell me. Bottom line is it's an entertainment program.
Exactly.
Essentially, or an opinion program, if you like, which is what this program is. This program is based on opinion, mine in particular, but yours as well.
Yeah, but I would defer that. You support your arguments with facts. These people support their arguments with anonymous, unsubstantiated, blah, blah, blah.
Well, whatever they might be, they undoubtedly believe them.
Yeah, this is true. And also, you have to remember these presenters are simply reading teleprompts. What the problem is, the editors who prepare this stuff. That's where a lot of the problem lies.
Well, the answer to that is probably contributions from everywhere. But I'm intrigued by the fact that there is. How can I frame this appropriately? The viewing statistics may put lie to this, but there seems to be an increasing number of. Can you hear this? Listen. My phone was buzzing. Listen.
Yeah, I can hear that.
That was the end. Now, there's a reason that I wanted to, because I could feel it vibrating through the desk. There was a reason I wanted to raise it. That was a British number, an English number.
Yeah.
0044 220 5871.
Yeah.
Now, you may or may not have been listening last week, but I made mention of the con calls that are now coming out of Britain. They were around a while last year. Now they've come back. If you get a call from Britain, 0044. If you get a call and you don't know the number, if you get a call from anywhere overseas and you don't know the number, but they're coming out of Britain at the moment, or they're rigged to look like they are, do not answer that call. I've had one of those every day this week, and one day there were two. I think yesterday there were two of them, and they were different numbers.
Yeah.
They're rip-off calls, and if you answer the phone, you've got problems. And do not call it back. That's the point. Don't call it back either.
Okay.
All right. Now, where were we?
Well, one of my things about the TV news is that they're loaded with adjectives. It's not a storm. It's a 100-year storm. It's not a fall. It's the biggest fall since Adam played fullback in the share market. They don't talk in facts. They talk in loaded adjectives all the time.
It's true. It's true. It's because they're campaigning for something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, George. Thanks. News Talk ZB 23 after 11. Numbers 0800 80 1080. News Talk ZB 1126. In the cause of honesty, I'm just scanning the phone. Looks like I didn't get two calls one day. Yesterday and Monday. If I went back further, I think there was one on Saturday too, and one today. So one each day. I don't want to mislead you. But I was sure there was one, or there were two. Anyway, Mark, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Mark. Good morning there, Leighton. And I'll say Happy New Year because it's the first time I spoke to you.
Oh, you can't do it in February.
I can because I'm doing it. So, anyway, I agree about the media. We don't have any journalists anymore. It's reading stuff off auto cues. If you actually break down the news, it's about 10 minutes of overseas satellite feeds off the press, whatever they're getting it off, or Fox News. Put a New Zealand accent over the top of it, and that's what you get. The rest of it's actually crap sports and anything else. When was the last journalism program we actually saw getting an in-depth program, something like the flooding going on at Orewa and things like that? When did you last hear about that?
I don't know, but they have them occasionally. Let's not say there are no journalists left, because there are.
Not on television. We've got these pretty sets with these LED screens behind. There are pretty people, young people.
Tell you one thing that I'm uncomfortable with. It's just a personal predilection. I do not like, in fact, I detest the round presentation desks.
Well, that's what TV3 doesn't have, you see.
Well,
they've got a normal desk in actually talk to. But that must be seen overseas. It must be
I think
somewhere
they did.
Overseas, for an overseas trip most probably, to go and have a look at all the news places. That's like even watching the news. I still have to watch the news, but I watch overseas satellite feeds, as you know. But the news, when you're doing the weather or something now, it's actually on a curve. It's not as, when it was the old way, straight onto it with the guy pushing a button straight in front of you, could see the weather a lot better. My personal opinion. But it's all to do with presentation and not actually what they're getting. We're not getting the facts of anything. We're getting propaganda. Everything's against Trump overseas. It's like everything was against Mr. Winston Peters over here. It was so, every time they talked about him, they sniggered. As a lady said a while ago, and you actually summed it up, ever since we had the internet and satellite feeds, it's just like a 5-second grab. We don't actually get a good piece. When they had Philip Sherry there, we're going way back now to TV3, you could actually sit there and he had a guy that put the news out unbiased. Now it's whatever the person actually...
Well, I sort of went into why that was. But the increased... Look, there are plenty of places where you can get the news that you want. You've just got to know where to go, and that's not terribly difficult. But it's not so easy. It's not so easy in New Zealand. But nevertheless, Mark, thanks for the call. 11:29. 19 to midday. China is on track to become the world's largest economy, yet the West still has a poor understanding of this economic giant. Greg Clydesdale looks beyond the standard Western conception of Chinese business, the Silk Road, Marco Polo, and the opium trade, and examines how Cathayan merchants made money and how China's national commerce has evolved over time. He explains the historical practices, values, and achievements of Chinese business, and examines how merchants built substantial wealth by mastering the spatial and temporal dimensions of the market. He explores the commercial revolutions of the Tang and Song dynasties, the salt merchants, the porcelain industry that became, and Hauka, he'll tell me the pronunciation in a second, who became the world's richest man. Greg Clydesdale is a lecturer in the Department of Business Management at Lincoln University. We spoke with him last year, and this book has just been released. Greg, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure, and I was looking forward to the arrival of the book. And I've read some of it, not all of it yet, but it's worth reading. Now, you, how much of this would you call a history of Chinese business?
Well, it's a history. Obviously, it's definitely history. There's a lot of books on contemporary China, But what's important about this one is we're going to have to get used to dealing with China. China's going to be number one in the future, not the United States. And there are some issues about China's business mentality that run deep. And by understanding the full history, you get that deep understanding that's missing from the contemporary books.
How does the history of Chinese business, how does that couple with communism?
Oh, good one. Good question. Well, we know from the writings of Marco Polo, he wasn't our first Westerner to go there, that China became phenomenally rich. And the reason China became phenomenally rich is because of the market economy. It started in the Tang dynasty. It actually started with government intervention, building a Grand Canal to carry goods from the south of China up to the north of China. They linked a lot of the waterway. But the Chinese are very industrious. They realized, hey, we can use these water routes to actually transport goods. And the largest market economy in the world came into being. And basically, the Chinese mastered the art of business. They mastered the art of being merchants. Marco Polo, for example, he came from Venice. He came from the leading merchant town in Europe. And he was just intimidated. He was amazed by just what superior business people these Chinese were. And whenever the government, like at the beginning of the Ming dynasty, the government tried to clamp down on the market economy, people became poorer, prosperity became worse. And as you know, with communism, the same thing happened again in the 20th century. You have to. I'm going to waffle. I don't want to talk too much. But
No, I'm enjoying listening to you. When was it the Tang? Did you say dynasty that clamped down?
Early Ming. Early Ming. So that's about the 1400s, early 1400s.
It's interesting that I don't know about most people, but I became aware of the Ming dynasty mainly through porcelain. That's how I first heard about it. So you're spot on. By the way, how do you pronounce that man who became the world's richest man?
I call him Haokwa. Well, that's what I call him, but my pronunciation's not the best.
Okay, but that'll do for our purposes. Haokwa. How rich did he become?
The actual amount was estimated amount was $28 million back in the 19th century. That's US dollars. I don't know what that converts to today. It would be several billion. Having said that, he may have been involved in there's a very strong probability, and I'd put money on it, that he was involved in the opium trade. He was part of the Kohong, which is based in Hong Kong, Canton area, dealing with, not Hong Kong, Canton, dealing with the Brits. Just to get you back, because I know it's a topic you're interested in, I mean, we do know one of the problems with the market economy is inequality comes about. But Deng Xiaoping, he was a communist. He was a follower of, now, although the relationship got a bit rocky. Yeah. In the 1970s, he introduced what was basically China's third commercial revolution. And that's one of the things you get in this book, that there's been a number of commercial revolutions. You've had the clampdowns, the Ming dynasty, and the communist one. And Deng Xiaoping basically said, yes, communists want equality. They want equity. But equality and equity means nothing when everyone's poor. Equality means nothing when everyone is poor. And hence Deng Xiaoping reintroduced the market to China, reintroduced this third commercial revolution.
And he did so successfully.
And that's why we're going to see China as the richest nation in the future.
All right, so back to the communism momentarily. The communist Chinese in China now, or the communist Chinese now, have a completely different interpretation of matters, although they still claim to be communists. Can you see communism disappearing altogether, or do you think the way that they're interpreting it at the moment and may in the future, which is really, to me anyway, more a dictatorial fashion, when they choose to, rather than full-fledged communism, will help the marketplace develop in a better way? Is it in fact a blueprint for the rest of the world?
Interesting questions. Well, first off, the one thing about economists is every time that you hear an economist make a prediction, you know that that's not going to happen. We're notoriously bad at making predictions. But so I'm more inclined to answer that question and say, China, as the level of prosperity grows, there's going to be new tensions in Chinese society, without a doubt. And they may even come up with new answers. But I don't think the market's just been so successful. It's always been successful for China. The reason there was this big turn away from the market in the early, of communism, is basically China had to go through some soul searching. One of the things I say in this book, the Chinese mastered the art of business. They were the masters of business. But in the West, we started to develop the science of business. After the Enlightenment, we really started to analyze things in depth and use knowledge. We started to create knowledge economies.
Yeah.
And we got ahead of China. We became more prosperous, richer than China. Chinese still had a lot of those basics that deliver wealth, that sense of discipline, the work ethic, the value of education.
All right. I want to talk to you about that briefly when we come back. Got to take a break. News Talks will be 11 to 12. News Talks will be, it is 8 to 12. Greg Clydesdale, the author of The Art of Business, How China Got Rich. I just want to touch on this, on the education, hard work, and frugalness or frugality that is traditionally Chinese. But all of those don't apply anymore, do they? Not all of them.
It's interesting. I mean, when the Chinese had the single child policy, a lot of sons in particular were being brought up as little emperors. They were being spoilt. And yes, very spendthrift. So that aspect, yeah, it's not as strong. The spend frugality bit's definitely not as strong. But the work ethic, the value of education, that's still there in spades. It's quite interesting. Last time we spoke, we talked about Maori and Pacific poverty. And I'm actually working on a new book on poverty, and I actually compare Chinese parental behaviour compared to parental behaviour in other parts of the world, including in the Pacific. And those values of hard work and discipline in the market economy are always going to bring results. And one of the things about the Chinese, and you get it in one of the chapters in that book, is because of those traditional values, when the Chinese, even when communism and Confucianism was ruling China, the Chinese would immigrate to anywhere ruled by the British, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. And in the market economy, the Chinese prospered because of those values.
How can we be sure, how can you be sure, because you seem to be, that those values will remain the same as China progresses, becomes more wealthy? With more wealth usually comes a change of attitude and a relaxation of some of those traditionals that we're talking about.
I can't be sure that it's going to stay there for eternity or in the long term, but in the short term, I would expect to see it, mainly because of parental practice. The way, if I want to know how to bring up my children, the model I've got is my parents, the way my parents brought me up and what I like, what I didn't, and what brought success. I think I told you last time, parental practice is like DNA. I still expect that the Chinese will recognise that hard work and discipline is the key to success in the market economy. The Chinese are a material people, compared to, say, the Indians that are sometimes more spiritual. I'm not making any value system here, any values judgment here. And I think, I expect to see that value be retained by the Chinese for some time.
All right. So those Chinese living in New Zealand, as an example, as we become, and this is my interpretation of things, as we become ever more dependent on socialism, and I believe that will continue under the present government considerably, so only my opinion, but nevertheless, is it not likely that those Chinese who come here and stay here will have their purity diluted?
Interesting question. I find at universities my best allies are my Chinese colleagues. They can get really annoyed. Some of my Chinese colleagues can get really annoyed. You see the Chinese work hard. Well, actually, I'll give you an example from a Korean. I'm going to move across the ocean a little bit. One of my Korean friends up in Auckland, he's opened up a few cafes. And, when he started, he was working 100 hours a week. And one of the things, he took on someone he was mentoring, and this young Korean lad, and he said, "No, I don't know if I can succeed. I don't know the locals so well." And he said, "Well, as long as you work harder than the Kiwis, you'll beat the Kiwis." And that's a fact. I mean, my friend David is an anti-Kiwi, so please don't misinterpret that. He loves New Zealand. His children are going to grow up little Kiwis. But it's that, what I'm trying to stress from that is that attitude of hard work is how you succeed. There is some support for what you're saying, though, because one of the things he said is he hated having to pay such high tax. He would work so much harder until this money goes. But now he's bought into the New Zealand idea that there's a safety net for his children. There's going to be things. So that does kind of support some of what you say.
Yeah. I want to conclude on a different note, I don't want to conclude, but I have to. I got sent something this morning. Forget the art of Chinese business. The new economy will be built on the art of feminist business. And then quotes the Feminist Business School, founded by Evergreen State College graduate Jennifer Ambrust, teaches that capitalism is an economy that values masculine traits such as meritocracy, competition and individualism, and downplays the profit motive. Any quick comment on that?
Oh, that's the idea. She's perpetuating the idea that business is based on the art of war, which in many ways is what my book attacks. Business is not based on competition, pure competition. It's based on cooperation. And that's one of the things you get from the success of the Chinese. They built networks. You had to build a reputation. If you didn't have a good reputation, people would not come back to you. They would not lend you money. You needed colleagues to supply you. I sent you a few of my books. The one book I couldn't send you because I didn't have was called Human Nature, Guide to Workplace Relationships. The key to being a good manager is being able to understanding human nature and being able to build good relationships with those you're doing business with.
Greg, there I have to leave it. I want you back before the next book's out, but when the next book's out, certainly. But there's more to discuss about this. It's a good book. You've done a magnificent job, and I appreciate your time. Greg Clydesdale, The Art of Business, How the Chinese Got Rich. Just got there. Back in the morning at 8:30. Until then, you have a great day and take care.
Thank you.